Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris, Chapter 6. And the company promised to sell to me, to all of us, gasped old Broderson, at $2.50 an acre. It was not alone the ranchers immediately around Bonneville who would be plundered by this move on the part of the railroad. The alternate section system applied throughout all the San Joaquin. By striking at the Bonneville ranchers, a terrible precedent was established. Of the crowd of guests in the harness room alone, nearly every man was affected, every man menaced with ruin. All of 1 million acres was suddenly involved. Then suddenly the tempest burst. A dozen men were on their feet in an instant, their teeth set, their fists clenched, their faces purple with rage. Oaths, curses, maledictions exploded like the firing of successive mines. Voices quivered with wrath, hands flung upward, the fingers hooked. Prehensile trembled with anger. The sense of wrongs, the injustices, the oppression, extortion, and pillage of 20 years suddenly culminated and found voice in a raucous howl of execration. For a second there was nothing articulate in that cry of savage exasperation, nothing even intelligent. It was the human animal hounded to its corner, exploited, harried to its last stand, at bay, ferocious, terrible, turning at last with bared teeth and upraised claws to meet the death grapple. It was the hideous squealing of the tormented brute, its back to the wall, defending its lair, its mate and its whelps, ready to bite, to rend, to trample, to batter out the life of the enemy in a primeval, bestial welter of blood and fury. The roar subsided to intermittent clamor, in the pauses of which the sounds of music and dancing made themselves audible once more. "S. Behrman again," vociferated Heron Derrick. "Chose his moment well," muttered Annixter. "Hits his hardest when we're all rounded up, having a good time. Gentlemen, this is ruin. Well, what's to be done now? Fight! My God, do you think we are going to stand this? Do you think we can?" The uproar swelled again. The clearer the assembly of ranchers understood the significance of this move on the part of the railroad, the more terrible it appeared, the more flagrant, the more intolerable. Was it possible? Was it within the bounds of imagination that this tyranny should be contemplated? But they knew past years had driven home the lesson, the implacable iron monster with whom they had to deal. And again, the sense of outrage and oppression lashed them to their feet, their mouths wide open with curses, their fists clenched tight, their throats hoarse with shouting. Fight! How fight? What are you going to do? If there's a law in this land, if there is, it is in Shelgrim's pocket. Who owns the courts in California? Ain't it Shelgrim? Damn him. Well, how long are you going to stand it? How long before you'll settle up accounts with 6 inches of plugged gas pipe? And our contracts, the solemn pledges of the corporation to sell us, first of all. And now the land is for sale to anybody. Why, it is a question of my home. Am I to be turned out? Why, I've put $8,000 into improving this land, and I $6,000. And now that I have, the railroad grabs it, and the system of irrigating ditches that Derrick and I have been laying out. There's thousands of dollars in that. I'll fight this out till I've spent every cent of my money. Where? In the courts that the company owns? Think I'm going to give in to this? Think I'm gonna get off my land? I, God, gentlemen, law or no law, railroad or no railroad, I will not. Nor I, nor I, nor I. This is the last. Legal means first. If those fail, the shotgun. They can kill me, they can shoot me down, but I'll die fighting for my home before I'll give in to this. At length, Annixter made himself heard. All out of the room but the ranch owners, he shouted. Hooven, Crotter, Dyke, you'll have to clear out. This is a family affair. Presley, you and your friend can remain. Reluctantly, the others filed through the door. There remained in the harness room, besides Vanamy and Presley, Magnus Derrick, Annixter, Old Broderson, Heron, Garnet from the Ruby Rancho, Keast from the ranch of the same name, Gethings of the San Pablo, Chattern of the Bonanza, about a score of others, ranchers from various parts of the county, and last of all, Dabney, ignored, silent, to whom nobody spoke, and who as yet had not uttered a word. But the men who had been asked to leave the harness room spread the news through the barn. It was repeated from lip to lip. One by one the guests dropped out of the dance. Groups were formed. By swift degrees the gaiety lapsed away. The Virginia reel broke up. The musicians ceased playing, and in the place of the noisy, effervescent revelry of the previous half hour, a subdued murmur filled all the barn. A mingling of whispers, lowered voices, the coming and going of light footsteps, the uneasy shifting of positions, while from behind the closed doors of the harness room came a prolonged, sullen hum of anger and strenuous debate. The dance came to an abrupt end. The guests, unwilling to go as yet, stunned, distressed, stood clumsily about, their eyes vague, their hands swinging at their sides, looking stupidly into each other's faces. A sense of impending calamity, oppressive, foreboding, gloomy, passed through the air overhead in the night. A long shiver of anguish and of terror, mysterious, despairing. In the harness room, however, the excitement continued unchecked. One rancher after another delivered himself of a torrent of furious words. There was no order, merely the frenzied outcry of blind fury. One spirit alone was common to all, resistance at whatever cost and to whatever lengths. Suddenly Osterman leaped to his feet, his bald head gleaming in the lamplight, his red ears distended, a flood of words filling his great horizontal slit of a mouth, his comic actor's face flaming. Like the hero of a melodrama, he took the stage with a great sweeping gesture. "Organization," he shouted. "That must be our watchword. The curse of the ranchers is that they fritter away their strength. Now we must stand together. Now. Here's the crisis. Here's the moment. Shall we meet it? I call for the League. Not next week, not tomorrow, not in the morning, but now, this very moment. Before we go out of that door. Every one of us here to join it, to form the beginnings of a vast organization banded together to death, if needs be, for the protection of our rights and homes. Are you ready? Is it now or never? I call for the League." Instantly there was a shout. With an actor's instinct, Osterman had spoken at the precise psychological moment. He carried the others off their feet, glib, dexterous, voluble. Just what was meant by the League, the others did not know, but it was something, a vague engine, a machine with which to fight. Osterman had not done speaking before the room rang with outcries, the crowd of men shouting, for what they did not know. "The League! The League!" "Now, tonight, this moment, sign our names before we leave." "He's right! Organization! The League!" "We have a committee at work already," Osterman vociferated. I am a member, and also Mr. Broderson, Mr. Annixter, and Mr. Heron Derrick. What our aims are we will explain to you later. Let this committee be the nucleus of the League, temporarily at least. Trust us, we are working for you and with you. Let this committee be merged into the larger committee of the League, and for President of the League, he paused the fraction of a second. For President, there can be but one name mentioned, one name to whom we all must look as a leader, Magnus Derrick. The governor's name was received with a storm of cheers. The harness room re-echoed with shouts of, "Derrick! Derrick! Magnus for president! Derrick, our natural leader! Derrick! Derrick! Derrick for president!" Magnus rose to his feet. He made no gesture. Erect as a cavalry officer, tall, thin, commanding, he dominated the crowd in an instant. There was a moment's hush. "Gentlemen," he said, "if organization is a good word, moderation is a better one. The matter is too grave for haste. I would suggest that we each and severally return to our respective homes for the night, sleep over what has happened, and convene again tomorrow, when we are calmer and can approach this affair in a more judicious mood. As for the honor with which you would inform me, I must affirm that too is a matter for grave deliberation. This league is but a name as yet. To accept control of an organization whose principles are not yet fixed is a heavy responsibility. I shrink from it." But he was allowed to proceed no farther. A storm of protest developed. There were shouts of, "No, no, the League tonight, and Derrick for president. We have been moderate too long. The League first, principles afterward." "We can't wait," declared Osterman. "Many of us cannot attend a meeting tomorrow. Our business affairs would prevent it. Now we are all together. I propose a temporary chairman and secretary be named and a ballot taken. But first, the League. Let us draw up a set of resolutions to stand together for the defense of our homes, to death, if needs be, and each man present affix his signature thereto." He subsided amidst vigorous applause. The next quarter of an hour was a vague confusion, everyone talking at once, conversations going on in low tones in various corners of the room. Ink, pens, and a sheaf of foolscap were brought in from the ranch house. A set of resolutions was drafted, having the force of a pledge, organizing the League of Defense. Annixter was the first to sign. Others followed, only a few holding back, refusing to join till they thought the matter over. The roll grew. The paper circulated about the table, each signature welcomed by a salvo of cheers. At length it reached Heron Derrick, who signed amid tremendous uproar. He released the pen, only to shake a score of hands. "Now, Magnus Derrick." "Gentlemen," began the governor, once more rising, "I beg of you to allow me further consideration. Gentlemen," he was interrupted by renewed shouting. "No, no, now or never. Sign, join the League. Don't leave us, we look to you to help." But presently the excited throng that turned their faces toward the governor were aware of a new face at his elbow. The door of the harness room had been left unbolted, and Mrs. Derrick, unable to endure the heartbreaking suspense of waiting outside, had gathered up all her courage and had come into the room. Trembling, she clung to Magnus's arm, her pretty light brown hair in disarray, her large young girl's eyes wide with terror and distrust. What was about to happen she did not understand, but these men were clamoring for Magnus to pledge himself to something, to some terrible course of action, some ruthless, unscrupulous battle to the death with the iron-hearted monster of steel and steam. Nerved with a coward's intrepidity, she who so easily obliterated herself had found her way into the midst of this frantic crowd, into this hot, close room, reeking of alcohol and tobacco smoke, into this atmosphere surcharged with hatred and curses. She seized her husband's arm, imploring, distraught with terror. "No, no," she murmured. "No, no, don't sign." She was the feather caught in the whirlwind. En masse, the crowd surged toward the erect figure of the governor, the pen in one hand, his wife's fingers in the other, the roll of signatures before him. The clamor was deafening. The excitement culminated brusquely. 100 hands stretched toward him. 30 voices at top pitch implored, expostulated, urged, almost commanded. The reverberation of the shouting was as the plunge of a cataract. It was the uprising of the people, the thunder at the outbreak of the revolt, the mob demanding to be led, aroused at last, imperious, resistless, overwhelming. It was a blind fury of insurrection, the brute, many-tongued, red-eyed, bellowing for guidance, baring its teeth, unsheathing its claws, imposing its will with the abrupt, resistless pressure of the relaxed piston, inexorable, knowing no pity. "No, no," implored Annie to Eric. "No, Magnus, don't sign." "He must," declared Heron, shouting in her ear to make himself heard. "He must. Don't you understand?" Again the crowd surged forward, roaring. Mrs. Derrick was swept back, pushed to one side. Her husband no longer belonged to her. She paid the penalty for being the wife of a great man. The world, like a colossal iron wedge, crushed itself between. She was thrust to the wall. The throng of men stamping surrounded Magnus. She could no longer see him, but terror-struck she listened. There was a moment's lull, then a vast thunder of savage jubilation. Magnus had signed. Heron found his mother leaning against the wall, her hands shut over her ears, her eyes dilated with fear, brimming with tears. He led her from the harness room to the outer room where Mrs. Tree and Hilma took charge of her, and then, impatient, refusing to answer the hundreds of anxious questions that assailed him, hurried back to the harness room. Already the balloting was in progress. Osterman acting as temporary chairman on the very first ballot. He was made secretary of the League Pro Tem, and Magnus unanimously chosen for its president. An executive committee was formed, which was to meet the next day at the Los Muertos ranch house. It was 1:30. In the barn outside, the greater number of the guests had departed. Long since the musicians had disappeared. There only remained the families of the ranch owners involved in the meeting in the harness room. These huddled in isolated groups in corners of the garish, echoing barn, the women in their wraps, the young men with their coat collars turned up against the draughts that once more made themselves felt. For a long half-hour, the loud hum of eager conversation continued to issue from behind the door of the harness room. Then, at length, there was a prolonged scraping of chairs. The session was over. The men came out in groups, searching for their families. At once, the homeward movement began. Everyone was worn out. Some of the ranchers' daughters had gone to sleep against their mother's shoulders. Billy, the stableman, and his assistant were awakened, and the teams were hitched up. The stable yard was full of a maze of swinging lanterns and buggy lamps. The horses fretted, champing the bits, the carryalls creaked with the straining of leather and springs as they received their loads. At every instant one heard the rattle of wheels as vehicle after vehicle disappeared in the night. A fine, drizzling rain was falling, and the lamps began to show dim in a vague haze of orange light. Magnus Derrick was the last to go. At the doorway of the barn, he found annexed to her the roll of names, which it had been decided he was to keep in his safe for the moment, under his arm. Silently, the two shook hands. Magnus departed. The grind of the wheels of his carryall grated sharply on the gravel of the driveway in front of the ranch house, then, with a hollow roll across a little plank bridge, gained the roadway. For a moment the beat of the horse's hoofs made itself heard on the roadway. It ceased. Suddenly there was a great silence. Annexed to her in the doorway of the great barn stood looking about him for a moment, alone, thoughtful. The barn was empty. That astonishing evening had come to an end. The whirl of things and people, the crowd of dancers, Delaney, the gunfight, Hilma Tree, her eyes fixed on him in mute confession, the rabble in the harness room, the news of the regrade, the fierce outburst of wrath, the hasty organizing of the League, all went spinning confusedly through his recollection. But he was exhausted. Time enough in the morning to think it all over. By now it was raining sharply. He put the roll of names into his inside pocket, threw a sack over his head and shoulders, and went down to the ranch house. But in the harness room, lighted by the glittering lanterns and flaring lamps, in the midst of overturned chairs, spilled liquor, cigar stumps, and broken glasses, Vanamee and Presley still remained talking. At length Abe rose and came out upon the floor of the barn and stood for a moment looking about them. Billy the stableman was going the rounds of the walls, putting out light after light. By degrees the vast interior was growing dim. Upon the roof overhead the rain drummed incessantly, the eaves dripping. The floor was littered with pine needles, bits of orange peel, ends and fragments of torn organdies and muslins, and bits of tissue paper from the Phrygian bonnets and liberty caps. The buckskin mare in the stall, dozing on 3 legs, changed position with a long sigh. The sweat stiffening the hair upon her back and loins as it dried gave off a penetrating ammoniacal odor and mingled with the stale perfume of sackett and wilted flowers. Presley and Vanamee stood looking at the deserted barn. There was a long silence. Then Presley said, "Well, what do you think of it all?" "I think," answered Vanamee slowly, "I think that there was a dance in Brussels the night before Waterloo." Book 2, Chapter 1. In his office at San Francisco, seated before a massive desk of polished redwood, very ornate, Lyman Derrick sat dictating letters to his typewriter on a certain morning early in the spring of the year. The subdued monotone of his voice proceeded evenly from sentence to sentence, regular, precise, businesslike. "I have the honor to acknowledge herewith your favor of the 14th instant, and in reply would state, please find enclosed draft upon New Orleans to be applied as per our understanding. In answer to your favor number 1107, referring to the case of the city and county of San Francisco against Excelsior Warehouse and Storage Company, I would say." His voice continued expressionless, measured, distinct. While he spoke, he swung slowly back and forth in his leather swivel chair, his elbows resting on the arms, his pop eyes fixed vaguely upon the calendar on the opposite wall, winking at intervals when he paused, searching for a word. "That's all for the present," he said at length. Without reply, the typewriter rose and withdrew, thrusting her pencil into the coil of her hair, closing the door behind her softly, discreetly. When she had gone, Lyman rose, stretching himself, putting up 3 fingers to hide his yawn. To further loosen his muscles, he took a couple of turns the length of the room, noting with satisfaction its fine appointments, the padded red carpet, the dull olive-green tint of the walls, the few choice engravings, portraits of Marshall Taney Field, and colored and a colored lithograph excellently done of the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. The deep-seated leather chairs, the large and crowded bookcase, topped with a bust of James Lick and a huge greenish globe, the wastebasket of woven-colored grass made by Navajo Indians, the massive silver inkstand on the desk, the elaborate filing cabinet complete in every particular, and the shelves of tin boxes padlocked, impressive, grave, bearing the names of clients, cases, and estates. He was between 31 and 35 years of age. Unlike Heron, he resembled his mother, but he was much darker than Annie Derrick, and his eyes were much fuller, the eyeball protruding, giving him a pop-eyed, foreign expression quite unusual and unexpected. His hair was black, and he wore a small, tight, pointed mustache, which he was in the habit of pushing delicately upward from the corners of his lips with the ball of his thumb, the little finger extended. As often as he made this gesture, he prefaced it with a little twisting gesture of the forearm in order to bring his cuff into view, and in fact, this movement by itself was habitual. He was dressed carefully, his trousers creased, a pink rose in his lapel. His shoes were of patent leather, his cutaway coat was a very rough black cheviot, his double-breasted waistcoat of tan-covered cloth with buttons of smoked pearl, and an ascot scarf, a great puff of heavy black silk, was at his neck, the knot transfixed by a tiny golden pin set off with an opal and 4 small diamonds. At one end of the room were 2 great windows of plate glass, and pausing at length before one of these, Lyman selected a cigarette from his curved box of oxidized silver, lit it, and stood looking down and out, willing to be idle for a moment, amused and interested in the view. His office was on the 10th floor of the Exchange Building, a beautiful tower-like affair of white stone that stood on the corner of Market Street near its intersection with Kearny, the most imposing office building of the city. Below him, the city swarmed tumultuous through its grooves, the cable cars starting and stopping with a gay jangling of bells and a strident whirring of jostled glass windows. Drays and carts clattered over the cobbles, and an incessant shuffling of thousands of feet rose from the pavement. Around Lotta's fountain, the baskets of the flower sellers, crammed with chrysanthemums, violets, pinks, roses, lilies, hyacinths, set a brisk note of color in the gray of the street. But to Lyman's notion, the general impression of this center of the city's life was not one of strenuous business activity. It was a continuous interest in small things, a people ever willing to be amused at trifles, refusing to consider serious matters, good-natured, allowing themselves to be imposed upon, taking life easily, generous, companionable, enthusiastic, living, as it were, from day to day in a place where the luxuries of life were had without effort, in a city that offered to consideration the restlessness of a New York without its earnestness, the serenity of a Naples without its languor, the romance of a Seville without its picturesqueness. As Lyman turned from the window, about to resume his work, the office boy appeared at the door. "The man from the lithograph company, sir," announced the boy. "Well, what does he want?" demanded Lyman, adding, however, upon an instant, "Show him in." A young man entered, carrying a great bundle which he deposited on a chair, with a gasp of relief, exclaiming, all out of breath, "From the Standard Lithograph Company." "What is?" "Don't know," replied the other. "Maps, I guess." "I don't want any maps. Who sent them?" "I think you're mistaken." Lyman tore the cover from the top of the package, drawing out one of a great many huge sheets of white paper folded 8 times. Suddenly he uttered an exclamation. "Ah, I see. They are maps. But these should not have come here. They are to go to the regular office for distribution." He wrote a new direction on the label of the package. "Take them to that address," he went on. "I'll keep this one here. The others go to that address. If you see Mr. Darrell, tell him that Mr. Derrick, you get the name, Mr. Derrick, may not be able to get around this afternoon, but to go ahead with any business just the same." The young man departed with the package, and Lyman, spreading out the map upon the table, remained for some time studying it thoughtfully. It was a commissioner's official railway map of the state of California, completed to March 30th of that year. Upon it, the various railways of the state were accurately plotted in various colors: blue, green, yellow. However, the blue, the yellow, and the green were but brief traceries, very short, isolated, unimportant. At a little distance, these could hardly be seen. The whole map was gridironed by a vast, complicated network of red lines marked P and SWRR. These centralized at San Francisco and thence ramified and spread north, east, and south to every quarter of the state. From Coles in the topmost corner of the map to Yuma in the lowest, from Reno on one side to San Francisco on the other, ran the plexus of red, a veritable system of blood circulation, complicated, dividing and reuniting, branching, splitting, extending, throwing out feelers, offshoots, taproots, feeders, diminutive little bloodsuckers that shot out from the main jugular and went twisting up into some remote county, laying hold upon some forgotten village or town, involving it in one of a myriad branching coils, one of 100 tentacles, drawing it, as it were, toward that center from which all this system sprang.